Assuming you can survive the current gauntlet of product availability, nosebleed pricing, even worse scalper pricing, the very bizarre 50 series GPU rollout, and now impending tariffs that threaten the very core of our beloved hobby, there exists a summit of supreme superiority, a pinnacle of peak PC performance, and that, my friends, is where we're headed today. I'm combining the Ryzen 9950X3D and the Nvidia RTX 5090 Astral from Asus to make a monster capable of both gaming and editing video at the highest spec currently available in a consumer desktop, and we'll talk about performance versus the 9800X3D too. Today's video is sponsored by Ugreen and their new Smart Finder. Compatible with iOS only, these are Apple Find My certified, and you just connect these tags via the Find My app. One iPhone can connect up to 32 of these. They share between 5 different devices, and the app's encryption ensures that only you know the location of your smart tag. In the unfortunate event that you lose an item, you can track these anywhere in the world. When it's close, you can play a sound up to 80 dB loud to help locate it, and it has a Left Behind feature that notifies you when you leave items behind at a certain distance. The battery on these lasts 2 years thanks to a low power chip. You can check the level in the Find My app, and when the time eventually comes, the batteries here are completely replaceable. These even have a child-proof design to help stop little ones from easily opening the cover and getting to that button battery. These are ultra mini at only 36 by 36 millimeters and only 7.4 millimeters thick. That makes it easy to attach to keys, bags, or conceal in your luggage. These are safe and sturdy, so it can better withstand bumps and protect the safety of your property. You also get stickers if you need to label these. Ugreen also has a slim smart finder that's barely thicker than a credit card to easily place in your wallet that has magnetic charging. To find out more or to pick up one of the new Ugreen smart finders for yourself, click the link down in the description. Parts list for today is pretty nasty. We of course have the Ryzen 9950X3D, which AMD was nice enough to send out for this. I have a 9800X3D that I just bought, but this should be more effective for high-level content creation work. And from what I've heard, the 9950X3D is able to do this without sacrificing anything on the gaming side, so we'll find out. This little beast has 16 cores, 32 threads with a base clock of 4.3 gigahertz and a boost clock up to 5.7, so double the cores and threads of the 9800. After shamelessly begging Nvidia to send me a 5090 Founders Edition over the past few months to no avail, Asus was nice enough to provide a 5090 Astral for this. They actually allocated this press unit for me a while back, but not enough time to make the official embargo lift. So this will be the first opportunity I've had to experience the 5090, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited. My favorite case out there for a more grown-up aesthetic is the North by Fractal Design. The idea of air turbulence has never bothered me in this case. I've never had any issues with temps in my build either. And I've always loved that you can get a version with no glass, just vented side panels. For a compact mid-tower, it can swallow a huge load of parts, including the massive Asus 4090 Tough OC gaming card. Just barely. That card measures 348 millimeters long or 13.7 inches. Jealous? Not to be outdone, the 5090 Astral states a whopping 358 millimeters or 14.1 inches in length. This is, without a doubt, the biggest, heaviest GPU I've ever seen. It weighs almost 7 pounds. I was not ready. Unfortunately, the North bottoms out at 355 millimeters. The Astral should not work in this case, but it does. Reason being is that the actual measurement of the housing itself is only 353 millimeters, leaving a couple millimeters to spare in there. The issue is I really want to cool this 9950X3D with the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 5 air cooler, but if that's not enough to get it done, we have no room for a front radiator. Now, I could have gone with the North XL, but I wanted to keep this thing as compact as possible for a mid-tower, and boy do I love wood. So for a similar vibe, I bought a variant of the Antec Flux. This is the standard, not the Pro, and this version's called the SE. It just came out recently, and it has solid sound dampened side panels on both sides versus a glass panel. This design pulls air from the front, obviously, and this entire lower section on both sides. It's pretty feature packed at $125, like these dust plugs for your top ports. Love that. They include a 140 millimeter rear exhaust fan, a reverse 120 lower intake fan, nice touch, and 3 120 millimeter fans up front. There's an included powered 5-slot PWM fan hub in here too. But the most important thing for today is that it accommodates GPUs up to 408 millimeters, which should leave us plenty of room in the front for a radiator and fans if we need to go that way. Because I'm going to try to run this purely air cooled, I'm going to stuff this thing full of my personal favorite fans. These are the 140 millimeters Be Quiet Silent Wings Pro 4s. Love these. All in all, the Flux is about 3/4 of an inch wider than the North and about 1.5 inches taller and deeper. In truth, it's actually surprisingly close to the North XL, which will just add another inch of depth and 3/4 of an inch to the height. Initially, I liked the look of the North more, but the front panel design on this Antec is growing on me. Main board today is the ROG Crosshair X870E Hero, a massive monotone monolith of a motherboard. Without the lighting on, it's very stealth, looks very classic class, and going with a high-spec board like this means I shouldn't have any surprises about running combinations of hardware. It is worth pointing out, if you didn't know, that you can still use an X670 for the processor that we're using in today's build. You don't specifically have to be on an X870 to do it. Memory is courtesy of Corsair. This kit is 96 gig of DDR5 across 2 sticks. Running 4 sticks of DDR5 stable with any kind of XMP or Expo profile has been very hit or miss for me, so I'm content today to max out at 48x2, but this platform supports up to 192 gig, so I can add another one of these kits later down the road if I want to. This kit's pretty fast at 6000 CL30. I like the Vengeance memory because of its low height, meaning flexibility down the road if I do manage to secure a Founders Edition card and want to run a small form factor build. And my favorite part, there's no RGB to manage. Storage is a handful of NVMe M.2 drives from Crucial, repurposed from other builds, running one 2TB Gen 5 as a system drive, and then a pair of 4TB Gen 5 drives, one for editing and one for games. Powering this beast is the ROG Strix 1200 watt Platinum, mainly because I know the 5090 can get pretty thirsty and I want to make sure we have plenty of overhead for this. This unit has a voltage stabilizer that normally defaults to the CPU, but you can plug in this purple connector and it claims to provide 45% more stable power flow to the GPU instead, and I think given what we know about the 5090, that's the smart play. I'd heard Jay's 2 cents in a video say something about their new Thor version having a load balancing option where if one of the pins didn't seat properly in the 12th pin, it would balance the load out amongst the remaining pins. I confirmed with ASUS that that's not a thing, and that Thor has the same technology that we see here in the Strix. And while I would normally go with some flashy aftermarket cables for this build, the fear, perhaps the irrational fear of melting my GPU or burning our plates down means I'm going to stick with stock cables for this one. And while this power supply may not have load balancing, if you're running the Astral and ASUS's GPU tweak, you can see a diagram of the 12-pin connector that lets you know that everything's copacetic. It even shows you the current loads for each line. There's also a warning light on the physical card itself right by the power connector that lets you know if something's off and needs to be reseated. This case is extremely easy to build, and I only ran into one hang-up, and that's with the fan hub, because the connections on these Be Quiet fans are longer than most. The connections on the hub are pointed out toward the side panel instead of down, so connected, they stick out, and I couldn't close the side panel. I just unscrewed it, flipped it around, and wedged it back in the top, and that gave me plenty of angle to close the sides. There's also incredible cable management here, including these little clips on the rear rail at the back and a very stout Velcro system. This Astro 5090 is a heavy hanger. It really demands a GPU support. Luckily, they include one with the card alongside a ruler, a challenge coin, and a right shift keycap that's a mini version of the GPU with movable fans. Most reviews or comparisons use scenarios that are CPU bound, like low detail or 1080p, so you can clearly see how one performs against the other. Obviously, we need testing like that. But for those of you that build really high-end rigs, splash for expensive GPUs, what you really want to know is, will this CPU add anything to my overall experience, especially when stuff like 4K and ultra detail levels are traditionally GPU bound. And when AMD says this processor performs at the level of the 9800X3D for 4K gaming, the proof is right here. These are insanely close because the 9950X3D has 16 cores, but only 8 of them have the same 3D Vcache from the 9800X3D. Traditionally, this has been finicky trying to get games to hook to the right cores. You've needed to make some BIOS tweaks, reinstall Windows, and use Process Lasso in some cases, and I gotta hand it to AMD. I didn't have to do any of that here. I mean, I did for the sake of testing, but I also confirmed that you don't have to. By the time I was double and triple checking results, I was just swapping these two CPUs back and forth multiple times on the same install. The only game in my suite that was weird was Call of Duty, and if I only would have tested at 4K extreme settings, I wouldn't have even caught it. But COD is a game I like to play on low detail at 1440p, and there are some inconsistencies. When the game doesn't use the Vcache cores, we see like 263 FPS on a basic preset at 1440p and 294 FPS at 1080p. That was dragging behind the 9800 by a mile. So using Process Lasso, I got the 9950X3D to 321 at 1440p and 348 at 1080p, effectively matching the 9800X3D. The weird part is that I don't have to use Process Lasso every time. Sometimes it catches by itself on the driver and sometimes it doesn't. AMD says there's a handful of other games like Far Cry 6 and Cyberpunk that may need a manual tweak, but that's going to be felt more in lower resolutions and detail levels. I did confirm in both those games it makes no difference at all when you're running 4K ultra settings, so AMD has made some huge strides here in how these dual CCD chips handle gaming. Kind of goes without saying, but the 5090 here is a beast, which you would absolutely expect at this price point, especially with this Astral OC card, which currently retails for, this is almost hard to say out loud, $3,360 US. I'll be real blunt, it's an incredible piece of hardware, but if I hadn't spent the past nearly 10 years doing YouTube, building my brand and reputation, there is zero chance I would be able to casually spend this kind of money on a GPU. We'll talk more about that at the end. So for gaming, there's no advantage to spending the extra money on the 9950 X3D over the 9800 X3D, but those extra cores are there to handle productivity and rendering work, and these results are kind of interesting. Starting with Puget Bench, these tests put each of these programs through a wide range of use cases, file formats, effects, exports, etc. In Photoshop, this system with the 9950 X3D scored 12,414 against 12,189 for the 9800 X3D. Awfully close. In Premiere, we see a better spread at 17,413 versus 15,536. In DaVinci Resolve, we see 14,514 versus 12,913. So better across the board, but for something a little more real world, I took one of my latest video projects in DaVinci Resolve that has an 11-minute runtime. This is stacked with effects, motion graphics, 10-bit footage, color grades, etc. to see how long it would take to render out at H.265. My older editing rig, an Intel 13900K with a Tough Gaming 4090 on studio drivers, handled this in 5 minutes and 49 seconds. This new machine with the 9950X tore through that same project in 3 minutes and 54 seconds. Okay, that's nearly 33% faster. That's pretty impressive, but bringing it back to real world again, how much is that time savings really worth to you? Is getting that render done in 6 minutes versus 4 minutes really gonna impact your day? And this one will really mess you up. This new build with the 9800 X3D instead finished this render at 3 minutes and 58 seconds. So what gives? Those canned benchmarks showed decently higher scores. Well, those canned benches include a ton of different file formats and particle effects, which I generally don't use in my videos. Turns out Resolve makes really good use of CUDA cores, and for whatever reason, my workflow utilizes a lot of processes and effects that are helped along more by the GPU than the CPU. I really wanted to see some Puget Bench results for After Effects, but after troubleshooting multiple hours across 2 different days, I could not get that to run. Blender is a great example of when you isolate the CPU, of course the 9950 X3D is going to perform better. Quite a bit better actually, scoring 589.76 against the 9800 X3D's 307.87. But really, you'd only opt to render on the CPU if you had a really weak GPU. A 5090 utterly destroys both CPUs with a score of 15,386.49, so the CPU choice is irrelevant in this build. Temperatures on the 9950 X3D in this build were actually pretty impressive. After stress testing only the CPU for 30 minutes, I saw a max of 77.4 C and an average of 73.3. Stress testing the entire system, CPU, memory, GPU for an hour to ensure plenty of heat soak, still only saw the CPU hit a max of just under 88 C and the GPU never broke more than 66 C. So this build is absolutely manageable on air with only one real drawback: it's loud. At idle with ambient noise, the room is just over 40 dB. The machine spools up in 2 notable stages, the first taking us to 48 dB, the second, the balls out mode, sees it go to about 53.5. As an editing machine, this wouldn't bother me. I know when I'm about to ask the computer to do some heavy lifting, so it running loud temporarily while it's rendering or caching the timeline is no big deal. But as a gaming machine, it's loud a lot more than it's not, so much that I can't use my open back headphones, and that's not gonna work. So this build in its current state would be a great candidate for an all-in-one or water cooling, not because of temperatures, just because of noise. So mission accomplished. This is one nasty machine, and it ought to be. All in, this build would run somebody just about $6,600 plus tax. So are there use cases and workloads out there where the 9950 X3D would be the obviously superior choice over the 9800 X3D? Yeah, probably, but I would have to go out of my way to find out what those even are. For my personal use case, and I'd be willing to bet for the majority of people who are primarily gamers and content creators, the 9800 X3D will serve you just fine, especially if you're pairing it with the high-end GPU. As for that GPU, I really miss the days when the highest gaming tier card was the 80 series, like the TI, and then you had the Titan cards. At least then, purely because of the naming scheme, I could convince myself that I didn't need a Titan. Titan was a flex. It was a different tier of card for a different application that I could ignore. It is a subtle bit of marketing, but when Nvidia stopped doing that, when they started calling the Titan the 90 series, for me, mentally, the 80 series just didn't hit the same. It's stupid, but that numeric scheme now made me feel like I had to have a card that I could have previously ignored. Like, I know I'm like that. I know I'm susceptible to marketing bullshit like that. Even being self-aware, I can't turn that off. So for the record, a 5070 Ti or an RX 9070 XT card is great for 1440p. The 5080 is solid for 4K. The 90 series is something you look at when money isn't a thing, or if you absolutely have to have the best of the best. And this Antec Flux case is an absolute W. So if you've got the pockets and the patience, or big YouTube channel, this is what peak performance currently looks like. Big thanks to AMD, ASUS, Corsair, and Crucial for helping make this happen. This one took a little longer than expected because I really wanted to compare these two processors and not just feature the 9950 X3D. But I'll have a fresh one out for you in just a few days. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you all in the next one. Stay up.